The rain came down in needles, soaking my hospital bag where it lay abandoned on the porch. My contractions hit like waves against stone, stealing the breath from my chest, but the door stayed locked. Through the window, I saw them, Julian and his mother, sitting warm at the kitchen table, steam curling from their mugs. My fists pounded the wood until skin split. She made her choice when she disrespected this family. Dorothy's voice carried through the glass, cold and sharp. Julian didn't move. He didn't even look at me. That night, between the rain and the pain, something inside me cracked. Something that would never heal the same way again. I used to think mornings were my sanctuary. Before the noise, before Dorothy's criticisms, before Julian's phone calls that seemed to last longer than our conversations, there was just me and the kitchen. The kettle hissed, the floor creaked, and sunlight slid across the counters like butter on warm bread. I liked those small rituals. The quiet clink of a spoon against porcelain, the smell of cinnamon toast, the hum of the refrigerator. They were proof that I existed in a space that was mine. When I married Julian Santino, I believed I was marrying into love, security, and if I'm honest, a touch of magic. He had that easy charm people notice at once. In law school, he was the one who could argue his way out of a locked vault. He wore confidence like a well-tailored suit, and when he looked at me, I felt like I was the only one in a crowded room. Our wedding had been small but elegant. White roses, a string quartet, the kind of ceremony that photographs well. I remember his hands trembling slightly as he slipped the ring onto my finger. "You're my forever," he whispered. And I believed him. But marriage, I learned, is not a photograph. It's not vows or a perfect day. It's the string of ordinary mornings, the shared bills, the clutter of shoes at the door. It's who shows up when the laundry piles up and your back aches, when your car breaks down, or when you're 8 months pregnant and can't reach your own shoes. At first, Julian was there. He laughed at my swollen ankles, massaged my feet, brought me pickles at midnight because the craving wouldn't leave me alone. But soon, Dorothy moved in, or rather, she temporarily stayed to help with the baby, as Julian put it. And suddenly, my sanctuary wasn't mine anymore. Dorothy Santino had the kind of presence that could turn a warm room cold. She was impeccably groomed, hair always set in curls, lipstick never smudged, even in her nightgown. She had opinions about everything. The food I cooked, the clothes I wore, the way I folded towels. "You don't put corners like that," she'd remark, tugging at the sheet I had just laid. "Julian likes them tucked tight. He's always been particular." Sometimes I wondered if she realized she wasn't just raising Julian anymore. He had a wife. Soon he would have a child. But Dorothy never saw me as a partner to her son, only as a rival. I tried to laugh it off in the beginning. After all, she was a widow, and Julian was her only child. Maybe she just needed time to adjust. So I smiled when she accidentally threw out the herbal teas I drank, claiming they were unsafe. I bit my tongue when she redecorated the nursery without asking. Painting over the pale yellow I had chosen with a sharp navy blue, she insisted was more suitable for a Santino boy. But every cut, no matter how small, leaves a mark. At work, I still tried to hold on to myself. I was an assistant archivist at the city library, a job that didn't sound glamorous, but filled me with quiet pride. Handling brittle manuscripts, cataloging old letters, giving forgotten stories new life. It mattered to me. When I ran my fingers across cracked bindings, I felt connected to something larger than my own troubles. Sometimes, I imagined my child one day running through the children's section, sticky hands clutching picture books, while I shelved novels on the other side. That vision steadied me. And yet, every evening I returned home to the Santino house, where Dorothy's perfume clung to the air and her rules filled every corner. Where Julian's laughter sounded different when she was in the room. Lighter, freer, as if he were 12 again, and I was the intruder. I told myself I could handle it. That marriages weren't fairy tales, they were compromises. That Dorothy's shadow would shrink once the baby arrived. I was wrong. The first warning came the night Julian forgot to pick me up from my prenatal class. It was raining then too, not the heavy downpour of that later night, but a steady drizzle that seeped into my shoes as I stood waiting outside the community center. I kept checking my phone, refreshing messages that never came. When I finally called, Dorothy answered. "Oh, Julian's with me, dear. she said, her tone airy. We stopped for dinner. I thought you'd already made other arrangements. I stood under the flickering streetlight, a plastic folder of parenting pamphlets clutched to my chest, the baby kicking inside me. Other couples left together, arms linked, laughter spilling into the night. I told myself it was just a miscommunication. But when Julian pulled up an hour later, Dorothy still in the passenger seat, I couldn't shake the sting. Babe, you should have called, Julian said. Mom thought you'd be fine. It wasn't that he had forgotten. It was that he hadn't noticed. The second warning came when I found Dorothy going through my dresser drawers. I had just returned from a doctor's appointment, one hand still clutching the printout of the ultrasound photo. Our baby's profile, tiny nose, rounded forehead, was sharp on the paper, and I wanted to show Julian the moment he came home. Instead, I walked into the bedroom and found Dorothy neatly stacking my folded shirts on the bed. These are hardly appropriate for a mother, she said, lifting a blouse between two fingers as if it carried disease. Julian likes modesty. My face burned. Those are my clothes. I'll take care of them. She didn't move, just held my gaze with that icy patience, as though I were a stubborn child. Julian deserves respect, Madeleine. If you're going to carry his name, you must understand that. I pressed the ultrasound photo to my stomach, the paper bending beneath my grip. I didn't reply. I'd learned silence was sometimes the only weapon I had left. But silence became a prison. The more I held back, the more Dorothy filled the space. She cooked the meals Julian praised, reorganized the house to her taste, and slipped comments into conversations that painted me as careless or selfish. Madeleine was resting again today, she'd sigh, placing a perfect roast chicken on the table. I suppose pregnancy is harder for some women. Julian would glance at me, half guilty, half defensive, and I would force a smile. Because what was I supposed to do? Start a fight in my own home, over my own exhaustion. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. It was built piece by piece, like a tower designed to collapse at the exact moment of weakness. That moment came when my contractions began. It was early, a cold evening in late October. I was folding tiny socks in the nursery when the first wave of pain gripped me, sharp and low. I sat on the edge of the rocking chair, breathing through it, telling myself it was too soon. But the next one came quicker, harder. My hands shook as I reached for my hospital bag. Julian! I called, my voice cracking. He appeared in the doorway, Dorothy close behind him. It's time, I whispered. We need to go. For a flicker of a moment, I saw panic in his eyes. But before he could move, Dorothy's hand landed on his arm. Wait, she said, calm as stone. She isn't ready. The pain surged again, stealing my breath. Please, I begged. The contractions are close. We need to go now. Dorothy's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. You made choices, Madeleine. Choices that disrespected this family. Don't think you can run back now and demand care. I stared at her, disbelieving. What are you talking about? Her eyes flicked to the hospital bag. You kept secrets. You've embarrassed Julian in front of his colleagues. You've refused my guidance again and again. Actions have consequences. Julian looked between us, his face pale. Mom, maybe. No, she cut him off. This is her lesson. The contraction doubled me over. I dropped the bag in the hallway, my knees buckling. I reached for the door frame, nails digging into the paint. Julian, I gasped. Please. But his shoulders slumped. He didn't touch me. He didn't fight for me. He simply followed her into the kitchen, where the smell of coffee soon drifted down the hall. I dragged myself to the front door, clutching the knob. It turned, but the lock clicked firm. Through the glass, I saw them at the table, Dorothy's hand resting lightly on Julian's as steam curled from their mugs. She made her choice, Dorothy said. I heard it clearly, even through the rain pounding against the windows. Now she'll live with it. My fists pounded the wood until skin split. The rain soaked through my clothes, contractions tearing through me like waves breaking stone. The porch light flickered, buzzing above me, casting the scene in harsh yellow. And then, in that blur of agony and cold, something inside me broke. Not just my body, not just my trust. Something deeper. A belief I had carried, that love could shield me, That marriage was a bond unshakable, shattered into pieces too small to mend. When the paramedics finally found me, neighbors had called after hearing my screams. I was half conscious, soaked to the bone. I remember the stretcher, the blur of red lights, the voices telling me to stay awake. But even in that haze, I saw the window one last time. Dorothy's silhouette, upright and unbothered. Julian's bowed head. And I knew. They had chosen each other. And in choosing each other, they had made an enemy out of me. For weeks after the birth, I moved like a ghost through the Santino house. My son Luca was tiny and perfect, his cries like thin glass breaking in the night. I poured every shred of myself into him. Midnight feedings, rocking until dawn, memorizing the curve of his lashes and the soft pulse in his neck when he slept against me. But even motherhood, sacred as it felt, couldn't shield me from Dorothy. This formula? She would sniff, holding the bottle like it contained poison. You should be nursing. Santino women don't rely on shortcuts. Or, he fusses because he feels your nerves. Babies sense weakness, Madeleine. You really must learn to steady yourself. Julian never contradicted her. If anything, he seemed grateful that she filled the space between us. He had taken paternity leave, but instead of learning how to swaddle or change diapers, he shadowed Dorothy in the kitchen, learning her family recipes, as though they were commandments. At night, when I crept into our bed after settling Luca, Julian barely stirred. His back turned, his phone glowing faintly. Once, I leaned over and saw a text from Dorothy, sent at 1:12 a.m. Proud of you today. You handled her well. Her. That was me, his wife, the mother of his child. Reduced to a pronoun. The fresh wound came 3 months later, at Luca's christening. It was a grand affair, Dorothy's doing, of course. She rented the church hall, hired caterers, and invited nearly every one of Julian's colleagues. The pews were filled with sharp suits and polite smiles, the kind of audience she relished. I had chosen a simple white dress for Luca, soft cotton with a tiny embroidered dove. But when I arrived in the nursery that morning, it was gone. In its place hung a heavy satin gown, yellowed with age. That was Julian's, Dorothy said smoothly, appearing in the doorway. A Santino tradition. My protest lodged in my throat. It wasn't just the gown, it was everything it symbolized. My choice erased. My voice silenced. My son wrapped literally in their legacy. During the ceremony, Dorothy stood beside Julian, not me, as the priest held Luca. Cameras flashed, and in every photograph, I was pushed to the side, as though I were only a guest at my own child's blessing. But the true humiliation came after, in the reception hall. I had been greeting a few friends near the buffet when I overheard Dorothy, her voice carrying just enough for the circle of women around her to hear. Madeleine means well, she said, tilting her glass of champagne. But she struggles. The pregnancy was dramatic, to say the least. Some women just aren't built for endurance. Laughter rippled politely. My face burned. She even frightened poor Julian with all that hysterics during labor, Dorothy continued. Imagine pounding on the door like that. Neighbors thought we were under attack. The blood drained from my body. She was telling it as a joke. My terror, my pain, the night I nearly collapsed on the porch. And Julian stood beside her, lips pressed into the ghost of a smile, not correcting a word. Something sharp rose in my chest, a heat that nearly stole my breath. I set down my glass before it shattered in my hand. I slipped out of the hall, heels clicking against the polished floor, and found myself in the empty church. The stained glass windows glowed with late afternoon light, colors spilling like liquid across the pews. I sat, clutching the wood until splinters pressed into my palms. How long had I been telling myself to endure? To compromise? To keep the peace? Dorothy hadn't just locked me out of my home. She had stolen my place in my own family. And Julian had let her. That was the day something shifted. I went home, laid Luca gently in his crib, and sat at the dining table in silence. I stared at the patterns in the wood grain, tracing them with my finger like a map. My mind kept replaying her words. Pounding on the door like that. Hysterics. Some women just aren't built for endurance. Endurance. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't built for endurance. But I was built for something else. Not rage, though I felt it burn. Not hysteria, though she would call it that. No. I was built for memory. For patience. For truth. And Dorothy Santino had given me all the evidence I needed. That night, as Julian and Dorothy chatted in the living room, I opened my laptop in the bedroom. The screen glowed in the dark, cold and clean. My fingers hovered over the keys. I wasn't sure yet how, but I knew this much. I would no longer be the quiet ghost haunting my own life. I would make them see me, and I would make them regret underestimating me. The house was always quietest after midnight. That's when Dorothy finally retired to the guest room with her silk eye mask and lavender spray. When Julian's breathing deepened into a steady rhythm beside me. Even Luca, swaddled in his crib, surrendered to the dark, his tiny sighs threading the silence like a lullaby. But I couldn't sleep. I would lie on my side, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling, the shadows shifting with every passing car. My body buzzed with a restlessness I couldn't tame. Sometimes I pressed a hand to my stomach, as though I could still feel the ghost of contractions, my muscles remembering what my heart wanted to forget. Sleep would almost come. Then Dorothy's words would echo again, sharp as broken glass. Hysterics. Some women just aren't built for endurance. The humiliation curdled into my blood. On one of those nights, I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The floor tiles were cool beneath my skin, the refrigerator humming like an accusation. I made tea I never drank, just for the sound of boiling water, the ritual of pouring. My hands shook as I set the mug down. The truth was unbearable. I had been erased in my own life. Julian had once been my partner. Now he was her son again, obedient, pliant, complicit. Dorothy had taken the title of mother, grandmother, matriarch, and rewritten me as a footnote. And me? I had let it happen. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles whitened. That's what gnawed at me most in those quiet hours. Not her cruelty, but my silence. My endless efforts to keep the peace. To swallow the anger until it soured inside me. But anger has a way of fermenting. It doesn't disappear, it transforms. One night, unable to bear it anymore, I pulled out an old box of photographs from the closet. Dust rose in the air as I lifted the lid. There was our wedding album. Julian's hand trembling as he placed the ring. The way he looked at me as if I were the only person in the world. I traced the edge of the page with my finger. Who was that man? Where had he gone? Beneath it, pictures of my parents. My mother holding me as a newborn, my father clapping proudly at my college graduation. Their faces looked back at me with a kind of quiet strength. They hadn't raised me to be erased. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. But they weren't the helpless sobs of someone defeated. They were cleansing, like the body making space for something new. The turning point didn't come with a lightning strike. It came slowly, like dawn creeping into a dark room. First, I began writing. In a plain leather journal. I recorded every slight, every cruel remark, every manipulation. Not for anyone else at first, just for me. To see it all laid out in ink, undeniable. Then I started collecting. Text messages from Julian that revealed his absence. Notes Dorothy left on the fridge, her sharp instructions scrawled in looping script. Photographs of Luca in clothes I had not chosen, in rooms I had not decorated. Proof of how I was being erased. At night, the journal lay heavy in my hands, but instead of despair, I felt steadier. This was more than pain, it was evidence. A story that had been silenced but not destroyed. One sleepless night, I found myself standing at the front door, staring at the lock. The same door where I had pounded until my skin split, where my cries had gone unanswered. I touched the cool brass, and something inside me hardened. They had locked me out once. But I could learn to hold the keys. That was the first night I whispered it aloud, the words trembling but certain. No more. No more silence. No more erasure. No more pretending endurance was enough. I didn't yet know what form it would take, how the truth would come to light, how I would reclaim what had been stolen. But I knew this. My story wasn't finished. And if Dorothy Santino had taught me anything, it was patience. She believed she was untouchable, her control absolute. But I had something she had overlooked. A memory that never let go. I would wait. I would watch. And when the time came, I would not just endure. I would act. Revenge, I discovered, is not a single act. It's a series of small, deliberate choices. And like any story worth telling, it needs patience, pacing, and proof. The first step was quiet. I called the bank. The joint account Julian and I shared had been slowly draining. Expenses Dorothy insisted were family investments, dinners with his colleagues, a costly renovation to modernize the kitchen. I had ignored the red flags, too exhausted by new motherhood to argue over every transaction. But now, staring at the numbers, I saw the pattern. Money flowing outward, never in my direction. So I froze it. The clerk on the phone hesitated when I gave the instruction. "Are you sure, Mrs. Santino? It will affect both of you." "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "That's the point." It wasn't much, but it was the first time in months I felt like I was holding something solid in my hands. Of course, Dorothy noticed. 2 days later, I found her standing in the kitchen, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the counter. "There's been a problem with the account," she said, her smile tight. "The bank seems to think you've made adjustments." I poured myself coffee, ignoring the way my hands trembled. "I have. It's our money, Dorothy. Mine too." Her eyes sharpened. "You're jeopardizing Julian's stability. Do you think clients respect a man who can't manage his household?" I sipped my coffee. Maybe they'll respect a man whose wife isn't locked out of her own home. Her lips parted, just slightly. For once, she didn't have an immediate answer. And in that pause, I felt the first crack in her armor. But victories were never clean. That evening, Julian stormed into the bedroom, his tie loosened, his face flushed. "What the hell are you doing, Madeleine?" "Protecting myself," I said. "From me? From my mother?" His voice rose. "You're paranoid. You're making us look ridiculous. I nearly gave birth on a porch because of you." I snapped, the words spilling out before I could stop them. His eyes darkened. "That's not what happened." My laugh was bitter. "Funny. I remember it clearly." He turned away, rubbing his forehead. "You're ruining this family." "No," I thought. "You already did." But I didn't say it aloud. Not yet. The next step was harder. I began quietly gathering allies. At the library, between shelving and cataloging, I confided in a colleague, Sarah, a woman in her 40s with sharp wit and a memory like steel. She listened without interruption, her eyes narrowing at the details. "You're documenting?" she asked finally. I nodded. "Good. Paper trails don't lie. Keep everything." So I did. I saved emails, texts, receipts. I wrote down conversations word for word as soon as they ended. My journal thickened, page after page, until it was less a diary than a dossier. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed opportunity. That came unexpectedly, through Dorothy herself. She had a habit of bragging. Her influence in the community, the parties she organized, the charities she advised. One evening, while she was on the phone in the living room, I overheard her mention a fundraising gala she was planning. "Of course I'll be speaking," she said, her tone triumphant. "People expect the Santino name to set the standard." The Santino name. Not hers, not Julian's. Mine too, whether she liked it or not. I began to imagine it. Her moment of triumph, her circle of admirers, and then truth sharp and undeniable, cutting through her script. But how? The first attempt failed miserably. I tried to speak to Julian's aunt, one of the few relatives who had shown me kindness at the wedding. I met her at a cafe, sliding across a folder of documents. Bank withdrawals Dorothy had orchestrated, notes undermining me in front of neighbors. She skimmed them, then sighed. "Madeleine, I don't want to get involved. Dorothy's complicated. But she's family." "I'm family too," I said, my voice breaking. Her eyes softened, but she pushed the folder back. "Not in the same way." I walked home in the rain, folder clutched against my chest, humiliation burning. Dorothy's web was tighter than I thought. For days after, doubt gnawed at me. Maybe I was foolish. Maybe endurance was safer than war. In the small hours of the night, when Lucas stirred and I pressed him to my chest, I wondered if revenge was worth the risk of tearing apart what little stability we had left. But then I would remember Dorothy's laughter at the christening, her words. Hysterics, some women just aren't built for endurance. And the doubt would harden into resolve. The second attempt came quietly, almost by accident. I discovered Dorothy had been siphoning not just household funds but charitable donations. She had insisted Julian's firm manage the accounts for the gala. And in the paperwork I found copies of administrative fees that led straight to her personal expenses. Designer clothes, spa treatments, even the renovation of her bathroom, disguised as community event costs. I stared at the receipts, my pulse racing. This wasn't just personal cruelty, it was fraud. This time, I didn't confide in family. I went to Sarah. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the documents. Madeleine, this is serious. If you play this right, you won't just expose her, you'll protect yourself and Luca. But Julian chose his side, she said firmly. You choose yours. That night, I sat at the dining table, the paper spread before me. My hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of it. Dorothy believed she had written me out of the story. But here it was in black and white. Proof that her legacy was built on lies. The setbacks had stung, but each one had sharpened me. I was no longer the woman pounding helplessly on a locked door. I was the one holding the key. And the gala, her grand stage, would be where I turned it. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, every table draped in white linen and gold trim. Dorothy's voice carried easily over the soft hum of conversation as she moved from guest to guest, her smile polished, her laughter practiced. This was her kingdom, the Santino name shining under the lights. Julian stood near the stage, nodding stiffly at colleagues. He looked handsome as always, but there was a hollowness in his expression. I wondered if he even noticed it anymore. The way his mother directed his every step. I adjusted Luca on my hip, smoothing the folds of his tiny jacket. I had dressed simply, a navy dress with sleeves that brushed my wrists. Nothing flashy, nothing that could be mocked as attention-seeking. I was here for one reason only. The speeches began. Dorothy's turn came last, of course. She mounted the stage, satin gown gleaming, hair perfectly set. My friends, she began, voice ringing through the hall. Tonight we celebrate not just generosity, but legacy. The Santino name has always stood for integrity, leadership, and family. Applause rippled. She smiled, basking. And now, she continued, with your contributions, we can continue to uplift our community. Every dollar you give goes directly to. Not every dollar, I said. The words cut through the hall. Silence followed, sharp and immediate. Heads turned. I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the polished floor. My voice steady though my heart pounded. Not every dollar has gone to the community. Some have gone to spa treatments, designer dresses, bathroom renovations, all under the Santino name. Dorothy froze, her hand tightening on the microphone. Excuse me. I held up the folder. Receipts, transfers, every fraudulent administrative fee tied to your personal account. Gasps rose from the crowd. A man near the front whispered, "Is this true?" I walked closer to the stage, my hands steady now. For months, she's used your donations to fund her lifestyle. While she scolded me for being weak, while she told stories about my so-called hysterics, she was the one siphoning money behind closed doors. Dorothy's face drained of color, but she rallied, her voice sharp. These are lies. Fabrications from a bitter woman desperate for attention. I met her gaze, unflinching. Then why does the paper trail lead straight to you? Why does every receipt carry your signature? The room buzzed with murmurs, rising louder. Several guests pulled out phones, scrolling through copies I had already sent earlier that evening. Sarah had helped me distribute them discreetly. No one could accuse me of ambushing without evidence. Julian stepped forward, his face pale. "Mother, is it true?" Her lips trembled, just once. "Julian, don't listen. She's trying to destroy us." "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed yourself. You locked me out, erased me, humiliated me. But you couldn't erase the truth." The reactions unfolded like a slow storm. Guests began standing, shaking their heads, some already leaving. The gala that was meant to crown Dorothy's influence dissolved into whispers of scandal. A board member of the charity approached me directly. "May we have copies for review?" "Of course," I said, handing him a flash drive. Julian turned back to me, his eyes wide, almost pleading. "Madeleine, why would you?" I cut him off. Why? Because while I was screaming on a porch in labor, you drank coffee. Because you let her turn me into a ghost. Because my son deserves better than this legacy. He opened his mouth, closed it. No words came. Dorothy clutched the podium, her mask cracking. You ungrateful. But the microphone cut out. Someone had unplugged it. The fallout came swiftly. Within days, Dorothy's name was dropped from the charity board. The local paper ran the story. Community funds misused by organizer Dorothy Santino. Her photograph, once a symbol of poise, now looked brittle in print. Neighbors whispered. Calls went unanswered. The empire she had built on image crumbled in weeks. Julian tried to salvage his career, but the association lingered. Clients withdrew. Invitations dried up. He blamed me, of course, shouting in the kitchen late at night, but even he couldn't deny the receipts. And through it all, I stayed calm. I didn't scream. I didn't pound on doors. I simply let the truth speak. For the first time in years, silence was mine, and it was powerful. The days after the gala felt strangely quiet. No reporters came pounding on my door. No one called for comment. The noise was all out there. In Dorothy's crumbling circles, in hushed gossip at charity luncheons, in clipped news articles that reduced her once grand name to a scandal in black and white. Inside my little house, the silence was different. It was warm. Safe. I woke early each morning with Luca stirring against me, his tiny fists balled in sleep. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen, and I would pour my tea, lean against the counter, and just breathe. For so long, my mornings had been battles, against Dorothy's judgment, against Julian's indifference, against the gnawing sense of being an intruder in my own life. Now it was only me and my son, and the hum of a refrigerator that didn't talk back. I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no triumphant speech in front of the mirror. Instead, there was laundry. Warm sunlight spilling through thin curtains. The rhythm of Luca's breathing as I rocked him at night. It was in these small, ordinary things that I realized how much had been stolen from me. Quiet joy, simple presence. Dorothy's empire had thrived on appearances, but I had learned something better. There is strength in plain, unadorned truth. Julian came by twice in those weeks. The first time he stood at the door awkwardly, his tie askew, his voice low. We need to talk. I let him in. Luca sat on the floor surrounded by blocks, babbling happily. Julian crouched down, tried to coax a smile, but Luca only looked at him with wide eyes, then turned back to his toys. The rejection cut him. I could see it. Still, he said. You humiliated her. You destroyed everything she built. I folded a towel, slow and steady. She destroyed herself, Julian. I just stopped pretending. He flinched, as though the word pretending landed heavier than I intended. But it was true. He had been pretending too. Pretending our marriage was whole. Pretending he didn't see me suffering. Pretending loyalty to his mother meant love. The second time he came, he didn't step inside. He lingered on the porch, eyes shadowed. I don't know what to do, he admitted, voice breaking. I held Luca against my hip, met his gaze through the screen door. You start by deciding whose voice you'll listen to, yours or hers. He didn't answer. He just nodded faintly and walked away. As for Dorothy, her presence lingered in the community like a ghost. I caught her once, sitting in her car at the end of my street. Her face was thinner, eyes ringed in gray. She didn't come to the door, didn't shout, didn't hurl insults. She just stared for a long time, then drove off. I thought I would feel triumph, but instead I felt nothing. Or maybe something softer. A recognition that her power over me was gone, not because she was ruined, but because I had chosen not to bend anymore. She had wanted me erased, voiceless, humiliated. Yet here I was, barefoot in the grass, holding my son, breathing free. Slowly, I began to build a new rhythm. Sarah helped me update my resume. The library where I'd once volunteered part-time offered me a position. The first day I stepped into that quiet space, the smell of old books and polished wood, I felt grounded. People greeted me with smiles, with respect. Not because of my last name, but because of who I was. Some evenings, after putting Luca to bed, I'd sit on the porch with a blanket, listening to the night insects. There was no rain lashing against the roof, no fists pounding against doors, just the soft symphony of summer. I thought often of that night when everything cracked open, when pain and betrayal pushed me past breaking. And now, months later, I realized something profound. The revenge hadn't been the exposure, or the humiliation, or even the downfall. The true revenge was living well, without their control. I didn't have to scream anymore. Silence was enough. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is still and Luca's small breaths rise and fall in the dark, I think about doors. The door that locked me out while I was in labor. The door where my fists bled as I begged to be let in. The door where Julian stood, unable to choose me over her. For a long time, I thought those doors defined me, thresholds I couldn't cross, barriers that proved I was unwanted. But now, I see them differently. A door isn't just what shuts you out. It's also what you can close behind you. When I changed the locks, when I froze the account, when I chose silence over screaming, that was me turning the knob, choosing a new room to live in. One with light. One with peace. Dorothy may always haunt me in memory, but she no longer holds the keys. She can rattle the handle, pound the wood, sit outside in her car, but she will never enter here again. I look at Luca, his eyes bright and unburdened, and I know that's what matters. He will grow up knowing his mother wasn't weak, wasn't voiceless. He will learn that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the choice to stand, to walk away, to build a home from nothing but your own steady hands. And when the rain comes, as it always does, I will not shiver on the porch, begging for shelter. I will be inside, dry and warm, with my son safe in my arms. Because in the end, revenge was never about destroying them. It was about reclaiming myself. And that is a door no one will ever lock again.